Hello, welcome to my channel. Today we're looking at Stanley Marvin Bernson. Have you ever heard of him? He was born in 1936. He's an American kidnapper, murderer, and self-confessed serial killer. So, and some of which he claimed to have committed in the company of notorious serial killer Ted Bundy. So he's saying he's friends with Ted Bundy and that he was running around killing with him. So, some people claim they do things that they didn't do. So, did he do them or didn't he? I don't know. Let's take a look at him and some of the crimes. And this is State versus Bernson, and this talks about evidence and things like that. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. It says he's charged with murder. The state of appeals from a pretrial, excluding other crimes evidence, which it wants to offer at trial to prove identity and to impeach defendant in the event that he testifies. The trial court excluded the evidence for reasons of unfair prejudice and undue delay in the proceedings. We reverse and remand. On December 23, 1978, Yvonne Weber was reported missing. In 1985, her remains were found in a rural area near the Cold Springs Reservoir in Umatilla County. They showed possible trauma and contained a .22 caliber bullet. Defendant subsequently was charged in this case with a murder. The state wants to use witness testimony and defendant's confessions to establish these facts. Defendant became acquainted with Weber after he met her in a Umatilla restaurant, which he was on his produce sales route. And I remember doing a video about they were trying to find somebody that they thought maybe traveled for work and was a salesman or maybe a produce salesman, and he fits that description. So, and I can't remember which video I did or which crimes, but it might have been somewhere they were left along the highway or something, but I'm not sure. Anyway, he told Weber's friend that he found her attractive. A few days before Weber disappeared, she told her mother that a man had offered her a job, which paid a good salary, included new clothes, a business card. On December 22nd, 1978, Weber appeared to be waiting for someone in a Umatilla grocery store. She left the store walking in the direction of the restaurant and was never seen again. Defendant's travel logbook indicated that he had been on another portion of his route away from Umatilla on December 22nd. Now, was it true? Was he at a different area? Did anybody look to see if he was in a different area? Or had he altered his logbook in order to cover for the crime? The excluded evidence pertains to the murder of another woman and an assault on still another. The state offered testimony that defendant met Deanne Remington in December 1978, that he often remarked to others that she was pretty. He offered her a job which would pay about $20,000 a year selling women's clothing and jewelry, and that when her mother returned home from work on the evening January 4th, 1979, she found a note from Remington stating she would be home later. Remington did not return. January 26, 1979, her body was discovered in the Horse Heaven Hills area of Benton County, Washington. Her death had been caused by multiple stab wounds to the chest. Although defendant presented an alibi defense based on his travel logbook, he was convicted of her murder. The state also offered testimony that in January 1979, defendant met Deanne Galassini, not Deanne, Dina Galassini, sorry if I'm chopping that up, in Hermiston restaurant, which was on his route. He told her about a job with a woman's clothing company, which would pay $2,000 monthly and included a company car. On January 26, 1979, he set up an evening meeting with her and told her not to tell anybody about the job or the meeting. Now, who wouldn't want a job selling women's clothing that paid $2,000 a month back then and included a company car? That evening, he drove her toward the Horse Heaven Hills in Washington. She protested and told him that she did not want to go there and that she would have to talk to her boyfriend before accepting the job. He became angry, brandished a knife, and told her to undress. He then assaulted her with a knife, cutting her breast. He then allowed her to dress and drove her to the area where Remington's body was later found. He again assaulted her, cutting her wrist. She managed to lock him out of the truck and drove back to Hermiston. At his trial for assaulting Galassini, defendant presented an alibi defense claiming that he had been elsewhere on his route at the time of the assault. he was convicted. She's driving his truck, or I think it's his truck, right? Wasn't it his truck that she locked him out of? Or was it her truck? I bet it's his truck, right? Why would she have somebody else's truck? Whose vehicle was it? Was it his truck or her truck? He drove her, so I think it was his truck. The admissibility of the proffered evidence is governed by, and there's the numbers. Evidence of other crimes, wrong, or acts is not admissible to prove character of a person in order to show that the person acted in conformity therewith. It may, however, be admissible for purposes such as proof of motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, knowledge, identity, or absence of mistake or accident. That is a rule inclusion that permits the admission of other crimes evidence when it's not offered solely to prove the character of the person, that the person act in conformity therewith. And it talks about being admissible, the evidence must be relevant to an issue at trial other than character or criminal propensity. Further, its probate value must outweigh the danger of unfair prejudice. So, and this just goes on and talks about those crimes, and it's very interesting, and you can pause it and read it. And it says the court also noted that the use of knives in each case was different. The court held the proffered evidence was not relevant to prove identity, and therefore it did not meet the first test of admissibility. So, like I said, you can pause this and read this because it's very interesting, I think. It says, given the certainty that defendant committed the other crimes and there are many significant similarities to the crime charged here, the proffered evidence cannot fairly be characterized as weak. Rather, we conclude that it is so strong that it can be outweighed only by a persuasive showing of such unfair prejudice and defendant as substantial to outweigh its probative value. That is a determination to be made in the first instance by the trial court. Accordingly, we reverse and remand on the trial court with instructions to reconsider its order in the light of our conclusion that the state's other crimes evidence is both relevant and highly probative. So, and you, like I said, you can pause it and read it. I'm going to scroll down, and then I'm going to scroll down again, because it's a lot to read. So, let's see. And this one says, and in Galassini, although a knife was displayed, it was apparently not used in any similar fashion as with the other two cases. So it's my conclusion, although there are some similarities, there is an equal number, if not more, dissimilarities, and that those similarities are not so unique as to constitute his signature on the crimes. And in any event, I feel their admission into evidence is outweighed by the prejudice and will be excluded under blank due to unfair prejudice and undue delay in the proceedings. So much. The state points out that the defendant was acquainted with the women, if therefore would not be unusual that he would inquire as to their whereabouts after they had disappeared. 11. Defendant attempted to or did have sexual relationships with the victims before assaulting to a killing them. He did. He attempted to have sexual relations. Defendant sexually assaulted Galassini. The state's offer of proof does not clearly state whether defendant's alleged sexual relationships with Wilmington and Weber were consensual, and we therefore must speculate whether that evidence has any probative value as to identity. In sum, the similarities are not so unique, considered either individually or together, as to earmark the Weber crime as the handiwork of the defendant. Yeah, it's just a coincidence that. Furthermore, there are distinguishing dissimilarities between the crimes that weigh heavily against categorizing them as signature crimes. The first, the manner in which each victim was assaulted was different. Weber alleged was hit by a 2x4, stabbed in the chest and shot. Remington was stabbed in the back. Galassini was assaulted with a knife in a manner completely dissimilar to Weber and Remington, suffered a cut on her hand and breast during a sexual assault. Additionally, Remington's body was found in Bernsen County, Washington, and the Galassini assault also occurred there. Weber's remains were found in Umatilla County, Oregon. For the reasons stated, the state has not demonstrated sufficient similarity between the prior crimes and Weber's murder to require admission of the prior crime evidence. Accordingly, I would hold that the trial court did not err in excluding the evidence and would affirm. If the majority agreed with me, it would not have to consider and the issue of whether the probative value of the evidence exceeds its prejudicial nature. Wow. So, yeah, this just goes on. I think this is over halfway through it, but like I said, if you want to pause it and read it, you can. Whoops. Try to mark that. I lost it. Hold on. I don't know where I was. Sorry about that. Yeah. I don't know if you're going to be able to pause it and read it now because I've lost my place, but it says that in both the Galassini assault and the Weber murder that he used his company vehicle, that he had sexual relationships or attempted to with each victim, that in each case the victim was attacked or murdered after a sexual or attempted sexual encounter, that defendant buried both murder victims in shallow graves, that he later returned to the scene of both murders, that defendant may continue references to both murder victims after their disappearance, and in all three cases defendant attempted to establish that he was elsewhere on his sales route on the dates of the crimes. In both murder cases, he prepared false log entries to establish an alibi. So, as argued by the state. So, and there's some other murders that happened that I'm wondering if he did them, because I remember them wondering if it was a traveling salesman or something, but I can't remember which video, and I haven't looked for it yet because I have so many of them. So, the only evidence concerning Weber's death apparently comes from a confession made by defendant. A forensic anthropologist, after examining Weber's remains, apparently concluded that a definitive cause of death could not be determined. Wow, that's crazy. So yeah, you can look for this to read it. I had never heard of him. Never heard of him. This is a drawing, a sketch. I don't know who did this. And here's a picture. And here's Wikipedia. It says Stanley Marvin Bernson, born 1936, is an American kidnapper, murderer, and self-confessed serial killer. So I don't know if he got so much time, and then I don't know why he's a self-confessed serial killer. I don't know if he was really a serial killer or if he's trying to get fame, because, I don't know. Sometimes they confess to murders they don't commit to get fame, so you can't tell who does that and who doesn't. You'd have to really study it. Convicted for 2 known murders in Oregon and Washington in 1978 and 1979. Respectively, Bernson was later investigated for around 28 additional murders around Northwest, some of which he claimed to have committed in the company of notorious serial killer Ted Bundy. Is there any proof that he knew him or that they were friends? No further victims have been linked to Bernson since his incarceration, and he continues to serve his life term at the Washington State Penitentiary. In March 1967, Bernson was given a 6-month suspended sentence for abducting a 13-year-old girl and driving her around Chattaroy, an unincorporated area northeast of Spokane. During the trip, the victim suffered an injury to the back of the head, which Bernson claimed he had originated from a wrench flying off a shelf and hitting her when he crashed his car into a ditch. I don't know if that's true or not. After the incident, he returned her home without harm. He was similarly charged with molesting a 7-year-old girl in Spokane in February 1976, but it's unclear whether he was convicted of that or not. Throughout the 1970s, Bernsen worked as a produce salesman, allowing him to freely travel across multiple states, with records of him residing in Spokane, the Tri-Cities area, Moses Lake, Ritzville, Othello, Hermiston, and Pendleton from May 1973 to April 1975. In addition, he indicated that he had also lived for short periods in Montana and Alaska, as well as supposedly working as a big game hunter in Africa. In March 1980, I don't know. In March 1980, In March 1980, Bernson was convicted of second-degree assault after attempting to stab a Hermiston woman in Spokane. For this crime, he was incarcerated at Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla to serve a 10-year prison sentence. 2 years later, he was charged for the murder of 22-year-old Diane Remington, a Spokane Community College student who disappeared from her mother's home in Richland on January 4, 1979, and whose body was found by goose hunters in a field near Benton City on December 29th. Bernson was then transferred to the county jail in Prosser to await trial. His trial began on November 15, 1982, and the following year Bernson was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment in Remington's murder. Following his conviction, Bernson indicated to authorities that he was responsible for other murders, but refused to indicate a possible number. In 1985, after being assured by prosecutors in both Washington and Oregon that they would not seek the death penalty, Bernson admitted that he had killed around 30 women while traveling through the Northwest. Among his confession was the murder of 15-year-old Sharon Weber, who had disappeared from Hermiston, Oregon, and 15 years old. In 1978, her remains found near the Cold Springs Reservoir. On September 16, 1985, authorities decided to halt their investigation until Bernson was convicted of this killing and allowed him to be extradited to the Umatilla County Jail in 1986. However, fearing that he was an escape risk, Sheriff Jim Carey constructed an elaborate ruse to see if he would. He ordered the jailer guarding Bernson to seemingly accept his proposal to let him escape, and after being offered $98,000 in exchange for liberating him, the jailer gave Bernson a gun loaded with blanks. After being given the gun, Bernson ordered the guards to empty their wallets and get into the cell, after which he headed towards a corridor. However, unbeknownst to him, Carey had expected this and had trapped by locking the doors both in front and behind him, forcing the would-be escapee to surrender himself after 22 minutes. After being returned to his cell, Bernson explained that he and his accomplices had planned to rent a helicopter to land on the courthouse building before hijacking it, cutting antenna cables and wire screening before successfully flying to an abandoned farmhouse where he would hold the occupants hostage. If it's abandoned, how do you hold the occupants hostage? While inspecting his cell, jailers located a letter opener and a diagram detailing his extensive escape plan. Carey, who had recorded the entire event via the security cameras, later defended his actions, saying that it was an excellent training for the staff. December 1, 1988, Bernson was convicted on 2 counts of solicitation to escape and 2 counts of kidnapping, for which he was given 20 years imprisonment and $2,500 in fines. However, his trial for Weber's murder continued to be delayed due to faulty extradition protocols between Washington and Oregon, prompting Justice Jack Olson to dismiss the murder charge and return Bernson to Washington State Penitentiary. This decision was appealed by Attorney General Dave Mayor, who contested that Bernson was causing the delays and that the charges should be reinstated. After 2 years, the decision was reversed and Bernson was returned to Oregon to stand trial for the killing. In early October 1992, despite him recanting his confession, Bernson was convicted of Weber's murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and his conviction upheld in 1994. If still alive, he presumably is still serving a sentence at the Washington State Penitentiary. While authorities at the time investigated Bernsen claims to additional victims, no further murders were linked back to him after the Weber case. So, does that mean that he didn't do it? Does that mean he didn't know where the bodies were? Does that mean they couldn't connect him to being with Ted Bundy? I don't know what that means. And his claims of accompanying Bundy remain unsubstantiated. Or does that mean they just didn't want him becoming famous and they didn't want him having the fame? The only murders he's publicly known to have been investigated for are the 1959 rape and killing of 9-year-old Candace Candy Rogers and the 1978 strangulation of 16-year-old Chrisanne Baxter, both in Spokane. The Baxter homicide remains unsolved. In 2021, Rogers' killer was identified as Soldier John Ray Hoff, who committed suicide in 1970. So, he may not be. He may not have killed as many people as he says he did. So, what are your thoughts on that? Please feel free to leave comments and let me know what your thoughts are. If you've investigated or looked into a lot of serial killers, and if you've studied Ted Bundy to any degree, tell me what your thoughts are on Stanley, Marvin, Bernsen. And please feel free to leave comments. And please pray for the loved ones of these people and that have been hurt and traumatized with all of this. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day. Bye-bye.